Sally, I have no idea how we haven't met before. We both started our businesses in 2012. Yours is Mindful Compass. You come from an amazing background, bringing together your nursing and psychology background, which is super interesting. And you've been teaching mindfulness to various groups, from littles to grown-ups all around the world.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
am so excited about this conversation because the thing is, Sally, working in schools and with families, right? We get the why, right? The research is out there. We understand it's beneficial and all those kinds of things, but it's really the how that stops people. They don't want to add, they don't want to add more to their plate, and they don't really know how, they're not confident for various reasons, right? And so, sort of to get started, I'd love to hear from you. How did you get to where you are? What's been your background? What's your passion?
Oh, well, first, Giselle, I just want to say thank you for inviting me. The work that you do is transformative in this world, and I'm really
Oh,
honored to be here. So thank
oh,
you.
thank you.
My background goes back, began my nursing career at Stanford Children's Hospital in pediatric oncology. And we used to have a Pac-Man game, and the kids that had cancer, and we would imagine those Pac-Man eating the cancer cells. And we did a lot of
Mm,
breathing with spinal taps or treatments. And so that's kind of when I look back at this very sweet growing into mindfulness. It's like it was started there. And then I went into labor and delivery.
mm,
And I also did some hospice. And so that sacred breath, we enter life on an inhale
mm,
and we exit on an exhale. So there's something about that breath
mm,
that I just kept coming back to. And then I went back to school. After my master's, I went back to mindfulness program for a year and then have been studying and just it's such a privilege to guide people home to themselves, because the
mm.
world feels kind of wobbly and big, and our children are our most renewable resources, and parents are working so hard doing the best they can with what they have. So this is just the work of my heart.
Oh my goodness, I love this so much, and I love that you're with humans at their rawest and most challenging moments. And I think I can already see just these couple minutes in the way that you be and that you present yourself, that you've got such an open heart, and you've seen so many situations where, in hospice, I was recently with my dad a couple of years ago, and that once you've been in hospice, there's you don't see life the same, right? There are angels working literally in
Literally.
hospice,
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah.
And just hearing that, and I think about on the other side of that is in labor. I mean, my yoga teacher encouraged me to through through labor, and it
Awesome.
was the most powerful thing ever. It really had me tune into use my breath to get through the pain. So I that is just extraordinary. And I think that because of those experiences, Sally, no doubt you've been able to connect with families and educators at such a deeper level, right?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think it just really comes down to meeting people right where they are,
Mm,
and that's enough, right?
yeah, right, exactly. And as you say, it's there's a lot going on in
Yeah.
the world. And what can we control? What can't we control? And the breath is something that we can control. So thinking about that then, from all your experiences, if you were to say, like, here's some three top tips, like there's a lot we can do. There's so many exercises out there that people don't often know where to start. So, kind of when you start to work with families and educators, what are some of your tips that are your go-to in your mindfulness toolkit?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. I think I want to acknowledge the fact that nobody has any more time to do one more thing, right? And even though we all have 1,440 minutes a day, it feels overwhelming to do one more thing, even if it only takes 1 minute. So, my approach has always been to be sustainable, to start small and meet people, like I said, right where they are. So, my favorite micro practice is take three. We take three mindful breaths. We know we can oxygenate every cell in our body. It's like a mini vacation. It's a little reset. It takes 6 seconds. When we look at emotional intelligence and their research, it's that 6 seconds that just kind of resets us. Um, Another one I did talk a lot about is I did some work with Dr. Kristen Neff and Chris Gerner about some mindful self-compassion. And so just as you're doing, it
Mm,
becomes for me, it's a habit, but we know that when we put our hand over our heart, it
Mm,
increases that oxytocin, that love hormone. And if you can't do anything, you can't even breathe, you can put your hand on your heart. And just
mm,
the warmth of your hand there helps to calm and soothe and regulate your nervous system. So,
mm,
that's pretty simple. Um, and then just especially with the littles, keeping it simple is just like see, hear, feel. What do you see? What can you hear?
mm,
What do you feel? What can you either touch or what are you feeling somatically? And letting parents and teachers and administrators and all the people we get to work with to know that they can't get it wrong. When I was in the schools, the teachers are like, I don't know where to start. It's like, just start where
mm,
you are, right? This is a
yeah.
forgivable process. You cannot get it wrong and have some fun, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
A lot of
Yeah. I
fun.
was thinking of in schools, for example, I'm a teacher substitute, and I'll use quick little things during transitions,
Yeah,
that if
big.
we're waiting for something or if it's between classes or subjects, I might see, I see something red. Do you? And I'll see the rainbow colors. I see something orange, or can you see, or what?
Right,
So just like getting them to look around the room, and then it becomes a game, as you say,
right,
it's playful, right?
right.
It's fun. I love that. And I also do a lot of modeling, as you as,
Yeah.
as you were talking about
Well, I'm
hospice,
seeing,
like, yeah, it's like you when you start to notice how often we put our hand to the heart anyway, and
yeah,
then it's just about bringing that intentionality, right? It's
yeah.
sort of, and so I do that in the classroom too, like if it's a little chaotic or it's bananas or with my daughter at home or something, I might just say, I'm just going to take a deep breath, or who would like to join me? Just like an invitation,
It's always
right?
an invitation. Yeah.
Yes, I love that. Excellent. So tell us a story. We love stories. If you've got a story whereby maybe a child or a family used some of these mindfulness practices that you're teaching to get them from not an ideal situation to a more balanced or regulated or emotionally aware situation.
Can I give you two?
Of course.
Okay. Because, stories are like the tapestry of life. They connect us, right? And
Absolutely.
it's like information tells, but stories are what connects us.
Mm,
And two of my favorite stories, I was working in a school with kids that come from difficult places. And when I'd walk in the class, it would be, Miss Sally's here, and they would get their mindful bodies on and scooch their chair. I don't have to say anything, right? They're so receptive. And
okay.
and we create a safe, non-judgmental container. Like it's a judgment-free zone. And this class, I think it was a sixth grade class, and there was a really a boy that had,
Hold on, Sally. I have to stop you there. This is a sixth grade class you're talking about,
yeah,
and you say you walk in
I don't
and
say
they're
anything.
in their mindful bodies.
Yeah, they see me come through the door.
I mean, I think that's amazing, just even that, right? I think most people listening would be thinking, wait, middle schoolers? Wait, sixth
No.
graders?
Oh
Right?
gosh. They
That
they are
speaks
sponges.
volumes.
They want this.
Wow. Sorry to interrupt, but that was just like you had me at sixth graders.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to
Oh,
say second graders or first
no,
graders or
no, the sixth graders. And
wow.
this little boy, young boy, boy teen, um, I don't want to exaggerate what the difficult place he comes from, but he comes from a
Mm,
very difficult family dynamic, and he and his buddies had been shoplifting at a local mini mart. And so
mm,
judgment-free zone means you can say anything in class, right? And we've been talking about the somatic experience, about where do our feelings hang out in our body? Let's just check it out, right? So we were talking about that and then what to do if we have big feelings. And I use with all kids, all ages, big feelings or worry thinking, right? And so I came back to class. I would come in on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I said, who wants to share how they practice their mindfulness? And this boy raised his hand, probably hadn't bathed for at least a week, at least. And I don't know when he ate last. Like, I'm not exaggerating that the
mm,
challenges that some of these kids go through. So giving them these tools it's such an honor, right? He
mm,
raised his hand and he wanted to share his story. And his story was he and his two buddies were going to the mini mart to rip it off, he said. And they had their whole, their sweatshirt and their big pocket sweatshirt and their hoodie, and they just had their whole thing down. And he said his dad didn't want him to go to the mini mart anymore with his buddies. So he said he was walking with his buddies, and all of a sudden he felt like a ball. He called it a ball in his belly.
mm,
As he got closer, he noticed he excuse me, he noticed that the ball felt like it was getting bigger. And he got really close. They were in the back part of the mini mart, and the ball was very big. And he looked at his friends and said, "Hey guys, I'm not going in today." And he turned around and walked back. And they said, "You loser." And they're like, "Come on." And they pressured him. He just walked away. And
Mm,
then he said he noticed that the ball was getting smaller and smaller. And then we're sitting in class.
mm.
And he said, "And you know what happened next?" I said, "No, what happened next, bud?" He said, "The police came and they took his friends away in the car. They got caught." So he got to make a really, really empowered choice for himself. Life's greatest motivators are inspiration and desperation, right? We want
Mm,
kids to be inspired to be their best self, not be desperate to be caught. So he listened to his body and made choices that were in alignment with his best self, and obviously was rewarded for it. So the pride of when he shared this story, I just wish I could have videoed it and shared it with the world, and the privilege of just planting those
mm.
seeds and having them, flourish with him. So that's one story.
I love that so much.
Yeah,
I've got chills.
yeah. Thank
Like,
you.
imagine just for a moment if you had a magic wand, right? If this story could be something that was in everyday life,
Yeah,
that children everywhere were then inspiring the grown-ups.
yeah,
Imagine grown-ups
yeah,
were able to understand, this is not something we learned when we were young, right? But imagine if we could, even as grown-ups, stop and take a moment to think about where those feelings sit in front of us
mhm,
before we respond. Some folks, right, respond to something on the internet, or before we respond to something that someone said to us, or respond in waiting for a grocery store, or in our cars, or with our children, or whatever, right? Like that, or even as teachers we're so stressed. It's a lot in a classroom. I mean, coming back to the hand on heart and of Judith Lassiter Hansen, right? Of how human of me,
yeah,
of being able to take a moment to see where that sits in your body. That's extraordinary, Sally.
yeah. So you want another story?
100%.
Okay. This one, I have a couple. The kids are like my favorite humans, right? So
Yeah.
but this one, the teacher told me, so I wasn't there for it. But there was an elementary school. It was a campus. The kids were like either 4 or 5 or 4 or 5 combo, and they had a suspected shooter on the campus. Now, I want to preface this that right now, the number one cause of death in the United States for children is being shot, over drowning, over cancer, over car accidents, over any disease. Like, we have an issue, right? We have a serious problem. That being said, so that's not taken lightly when somebody's on a campus, right? So
Mm,
the teacher was telling me when I went to class, it was, went on Tuesday, came back on Thursday, and she said, "You're not going to believe this." And with tears in her eyes, she said they had lockdown. All the kids were on the ground, and we know what's happening. This is trauma for the children. And she looked over in the corner, and there was a few of the kids that were in my mindfulness class, and they had said totally on their own, "This is scary. We've got big feelings. We're dysregulated." Right? So they identified it. They used those words. We're dysregulated. I teach this to 5-year-olds. So, they all know their brain, they're in fight, flight, or freeze. They know they're in their amygdala. It's just kind of like a known thing. And so they said, "Let's play finding five, 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear." And so they went through and they took turns. And with the kids, I always give them a little treat for the one thing they could taste. They come up with their eyes closed, and, it's just a fun thing to do. So what they did in their game is they closed their eyes and they imagined tasting something, and then they described it. One was a lemon drop, one was a chocolate chip. So while the whole world was in this total chaos, panic, trauma, drama, scared stuff, this small circle of children was in the corner empowering themselves, regulating their own nervous system, connecting with shared humanity, and navigating through some very difficult moments. And if that's not teaching resilience, I don't know what is. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And imagine if you could add those practices to the fire drill, you
Right.
know?
I didn't even
Right,
think of
because
that,
I
but
spoke to a
like
preschool
that.
teacher last year, and, she said that they
Yeah.
teach breathing exercise at the beginning of the year in September so that when a fire alarm goes off, the children because since COVID, children are more in her experience, the students are more dysregulated and more
Right.
scared, more traumatized by the sound of the fire alarm. So
Yeah.
by teaching breathing exercises, the children were able to be in the face of that loud sound and we're able to regulate.
Yeah.
So it's similar thing that we're teaching the basics of how to look after yourself, what actions, but
Right.
we're not looking after the mind in those moments, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And have you got another story that's a little bit more mainstream as such, something that is something more everyday mindfulness, if you know?
Oh. Um, I had a 5-year-old who had a whole string of, letters and labels next to her name, ODD, ADHD, like a string of
Yes.
labels. And, she did once again, a lot of the schools I work with, there's families that come from difficult places, and she volunteered to teach, the PTA board that came in because, they wanted to make sure this mindfulness is not too woo-woo, like, because I always talk about this is neuroscience, right? We all have
Yeah.
this 3-pound gray matter. It's all based in neuroscience. And so she got up and she told the teachers and the board that came in that she's taught mindfulness to her horse, and she wanted to teach them the hand model of the brain and had them all raise their hand and talk about the amygdala and fight, flight, or freeze and her PFC. And this is a 5-year-old, you know? So I just think that there's so many little stories about just,
Yeah.
when we teach the kids, finding that common language with them. And with littles, it's like if I go in and I'm going to start talking about an inhale and an exhale, but I don't talk about what it is,
Mm.
we're not in the same starting, right? Like how often when we were growing up did the teacher say, "Pay attention, class, pay attention."
Mhm.
And we
Yeah.
never teach how to pay attention or why to pay attention, right? And so I'm really mindful about teaching those words. And it was a first grade class, and this little girl raised her hands. I said the inhale and then the exhale, and she raised her hand. She goes, "Miss Sally, that's sure silly." And I'm like, "What's silly?" She said, "It shouldn't be an exhale." And I said, "Okay, what should it be?" She said, "It should be an outhale." The inhale and the outhale. Like, why didn't
Yes.
we think of that?
Right. Genius,
Right?
right? Yeah,
Right?
genius. What I'm
Yes. So,
loving about your work, and that's Dan Siegel, right? With the
yeah.
the
Yeah. Hand
hand.
model the
Yes.
brain. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a great one to look. You can see, I think he's got a cute little video on YouTube and
Yeah.
also in his book, right, about showing that. I love what you're talking about here is it's more than a 15-minute or whatever it is class. For you, it's really this way of how do we make mindfulness an everyday practice and embody it, so it's not just you're only going to practice it with Miss Sally. This is how do we integrate in our whole lives? Talk a little bit more about you've shared a lot about embodied mindfulness. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, and somewhat is like the example of the child that went to the mini mart. He was able
Mm,
to drop in and notice that in his body he was having an experience
mm,
that had a message for him. So when we teach children how to listen inside their bodies, and to trust that wisdom, that really helps them going out in the world. I mean, in some programs they teach good touch, bad touch, but what if you could trust in your body that that person doesn't feel good for me to be around, and just know that as a truth for you, and have the permission to say no. No is a full sentence, right? um so the embodied part also is I teach much of the storying in our head. It's just a story. Just because we have a thought, it doesn't make it true, right? So if you have
mm.
60,000 thoughts a day, and we know that what 95% are repeat, 80% are negative when we look at the research, what are those thoughts? And are we the driver of our own life, or are we the co-pilot to our thoughts? So when you
Yeah.
teach this to the kids, and the power of your thoughts, your mind, your brain, and your choices, they're getting to have an internal landscape understanding about what's going on in their body, and in their mind. And like you said, it's not 15 minutes or a half hour in class, it's every day. And so they come back with their stories to me about how they're able to use this because we practice when life is smooth and easy, but when the emotional waves of life come, now they have seasoned tools, even the littles. So, we talk a lot about hands over heart, and it was fun. I did a full school integration, and the first school that I did, and the kids would be so bossy with each other. They would look and say, "You're in your amygdala. You got to take three, right? Or you're going to flip your
Right.
lid." Or they would say, "Do you want me to breathe with you?"
Mm,
The empathy and the compassion also learn skills, right? When we look at what creates a successful adult is all the soft skills. So
mm,
I believe that this is more important now than ever before.
mm.
It really is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And teaching kids and adults to drop from the story, from the narrative into our heart and just align with what is the wisdom and follow the energy. Let the light lead the way. Like if this doesn't light you up, then it's a no. If you want to go on this playground, but it doesn't feel right, it's a no. And then really kind of mirroring kids back to themselves and reminding them of their superpowers that they were born with.
Mm. Yes. I love this. Talk to us a little bit more about this school-wide initiative. That sounds amazing. How did you get that set up?
Everything I've ever done has just like you today, like it just comes. I have
Yes.
no idea how it all works.
Yeah.
I live in a rural area in California near Yosemite. So, and it's also very fundamental. We even have like the Amish community with the bonnets. Like I've been boycotted in schools. I used to have like a brass bell and now I have the blue vibratone. Although if you have a long, 8-inch blue vibratone and you say that to a class of eighth graders, expect the giggles. So now I call
Right.
it my bluebell. And
Yes.
they're the best teachers.
Yeah.
And so when I did this, it was back, the first one was in 2015, and they followed me with data. And I really didn't care about the data. I just wanted to be with the kids and the families and do my thing. But they did. So, for example, I'll give you one statistic. In March of 2015, this tiny but mighty school, so kindergarten to sixth grade, I worked with all the teachers, worked with the administrators, the kids, and the parents. So every class we had a calm corner. Every class we were set up for success, and it was really a beautiful experiment that was 10 years ago and is still thriving. Um, so in March of 2015, they had 60 detentions. Now, a tiny school, that's a lot. These, once again, are kids that come from difficult and families from difficult places. Fast forward after doing this program, in March of 2016, they had 9 detentions.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Uh,
So what were the kinds of practices that you were teaching the teachers to teach? Because you weren't doing all the teaching, right? Were you empowering the teachers to
I,
do
I
it?
empowered the
How'd it
teachers,
work?
but I set it up, kind of like the stories that I worked with in my book. Like I have 32
Mhm.
primary lessons, so I would do those with them. And then I made scripts for the teachers of the littles. But if you can read, you can do a script. So the kids would take turns, doing like a guided meditation to start. We would do a check-in and let it be child led. So, and the kids have taught me they don't like the word meditation. They like the word stillness. So
Mm,
at least here, the kids that I work with, it just seems to be across the schools I've been in. And so we would practice stillness when I'd walk in, they pull their chairs back, they get their mindful bodies on. But I'd always ask, what number are you guys at? And they go up in 30-second increments. Well, today we're going to go to 2.5 minutes. Okay. Does everybody agree? Because it's all or nothing. If somebody can't, we don't have to. That's okay. And so so I model with the teachers and do the program. And then when I leave, give them tools to keep going. And then a lot of the schools have had me come back and just do kind of like a refresher for the teachers and just kind of support. I've been really lucky that way. So
and have all the teachers been on board? I'm curious about sort of was everybody full on and all the families or
no,
How
No,
did yeah. So
no, not at
you talked
all.
about the yeses or, they've got your book, they're
Yeah.
working with you, they're all in. The students are probably in because they're in, right? Ish. There's always going to be some kiddos who are not sure, but talk to us about how did you work with teachers and families or administration who were not an instant yes.
Um, that's such a good question. And let me go back to the nine detentions at that school. Five of them, this isn't in the research, but I know because of them with, I work with the principal. Five of them came from the same paraprofessional, the teacher's aide, that thought this was a cult. So
Oh,
she never bought into it.
interesting.
She didn't buy in, and it was get to the office, get to the office, get to the office. So she skewed our data. That being said, she was a great teacher for me.
Of course, yeah.
When the first school over here that I did a presentation, and it was really nice for the teachers and give them some tools and then kind of, offer the program. And the principal at the time, or the superintendent at the time, he came and he was not buying in. Um, and so he said, I don't think any teachers are really going to be interested, but I'll let you just, do your pitch. Like, he was a little condescending. And I just thought, I'm here. I'm going to have fun. Let's just see what happens. So of the 44 teachers that attended the talk, 36 signed up. He said maybe four or five.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so again, that gap with the teachers who were a no, where did they not integrate at all or what, how did you
The
handle?
teachers were a no, because I would like the school over the first school that I did, we did the whole school because it was small and there was 100% buy-in. Here's the
Yeah.
thing, even when I'm teaching in the class, I tell the kids I have only one request, that you want to be here. You know,
Yeah.
my teens, I do class as much as possible outside. My only request is that you want to be here. And if you don't, that's okay. And
Right.
we'll make a plan, right?
Right.
Um, I think so much comes from misinformation. So,
Mm.
for example, I'm in a second grade, the third grade class, walk in, check with the kids, they pull their little chairs back and we drop in. And then I look over before we start and there's a mom there and I notice she's got her phone and I see the little recorder. And I went,
Oh,
oh, yeah.
interesting.
So I said to her, excuse me, are you recording us? And she goes, yes, I am. I said, okay. So I deferred to the teacher. I'm just a consultant. I go in the class, the teacher makes the decisions. And I said, are you okay with this? She goes, yeah, why not? So I go back to the kids, we drop in, and then I would have them, when they open their eyes, distill one word of how they're feeling in the moment, which is really a big ask of children of all ages, to identify your now lived experience.
Mm.
So it ranges anywhere from tired, angry, sleepy, hungry, but relaxed. They can just like, oh, right now I feel. So the first child I asked after this stillness, and I remember it was 2.5 minutes, I said, how are you feeling? And when the first girl said, I feel like I'm being watched. And I stopped
Interesting.
class. I said, you guys, I made a huge mistake. I am so sorry. I want to apologize to you, and we need to stop class right now. Because I asked, Mrs. Teacher, if it was okay to be recorded, and I didn't ask you guys.
Mm.
And that's on me. So they were okay to keep going. We had a little conversation. I tried to be really positive, but I wanted to her experience was, I feel watched. That wasn't okay. And that was my responsibility. So then after class, I asked the teacher, because I wanted to just speak to the resistance in this. So I asked the parent, I said, can we chat after class? I would love to talk to you outside. So we went outside, and like, if I'm really honest, I didn't set down the judgment. I was a little cranky about it, but I came across, said all the right things, because I really wanted it to end well, but it didn't feel like it was going that way. But I'm like, I'm not going to quit, right? So the first thing I said to her, we sat outside on the bench, and I said, first, I just want to say, can you imagine a world where all the parents care as much about their children's education as you do?
Oh, that's kind.
So just kind of meet her where she is, right? She's coming from a place of being concerned about her daughter.
Mm.
And then I asked, did you hear anything that you weren't comfortable with? She said, no, but I know what you're going to do. My husband is a preacher and we saw it on the internet, and you're going to empty their minds and you're going to chant and you're going to let the devil in. And I said, that's really interesting information. And that's not what I do. And let's talk about what I do. And I also have a list of all the verses in the Bible that talk about mindfulness. And I talked about in her language, right? No judgment, set down any judgment. But she's coming in as a preacher's wife that has misinformation and is open to receiving the little bit that I had to share with her. So I said, imagine if your daughter was able to take her attention and focus on the sermon. Imagine when we talk about empathy and compassion and kindness, that she's getting to practice those skills in the classroom, not just at church or at home. So and then I finished it with, thank you again for caring so much. And I want you to feel comfortable coming to every class. I'm just going to check in with the kids. And she never came back. She was okay because when I talked about neuroscience, and that was also when I changed my ringing to my bluebell, just to be really clear. So
Mm.
there is resistance, and resistance comes from misinformation, whether it's, on the school board, a parent group, like I teach to Amish community now. So if I can teach to Amish community about the 3-pound gray matter between our ears and our breath and how this all works to our advantage, it's for everybody. Yeah, so that they've taught me so much. I mean, literally boycotted into a PTA meeting with signs. And now I welcome it. In the beginning, it made me really uncomfortable. And now I'm like, it's just because they don't know.
Right.
And
It's fear, right? The fear of the unknown,
yeah.
right? And so if
But
you,
it's also they care. They're boycotting because
Mhm.
they're afraid, but they're
Yeah,
afraid because they really want their children to be okay. So let's start there. That's our
yeah,
common ground, right? Because I think if we find that common place, then we can communicate. And that's the
right.
basis of any issue, obviously, is a miscommunication or lack of. So yeah,
And no doubt for her, the fact that she was there, she was able to no doubt experience it herself.
yeah,
As you were practicing the activities with the children, no doubt she was having a moment to experience herself. And who knows if she went on to, as you say, be mindful in other situations,
yeah,
that it made it more relevant to her. That's a
right,
really powerful story, Sally, and one that I guarantee all children's yoga teachers, all mindfulness teachers go through,
right,
is up against, one of the biggest things we hear, the obstacle is how do we get buy-in,
yeah,
right? And often, I mean, how many times do you hear, Sally, the stories about the children or the grown-ups that you think are the most resistant
yeah,
are often the ones that have the biggest impact
yeah.
on,
So, well said, well said.
you
And
know?
the other piece is for us to remember, because when this first started, I personalized it. I made it about me, right? Like my ego got in the way of, I'm doing a good thing here. I'm helping
Mm,
your child, right? And then when we step out of that and meet people right where they are with that compassion, there's no resistance. As long, we're energetic beings, so if we come to meet people who have resistance with resistance, that's not going to end well. That's silly, right?
mm.
um
And that speaks to you modeling mindfulness,
yeah, yeah,
right? And so if you yourself are practicing, oh my goodness, I have to tell you a story. It came to mind back when I started in 2012. I was in San Francisco, actually. I used to live in San Francisco. And I met up with another children's yoga teacher because I wanted to, I've been writing these books and I wanted to speak and, connect with people in San Francisco. And the thing she said to me, Sally, that just hurt my heart, I'll never forget it. She said, I'm teaching children's yoga so often, I don't have time to do my own practice. And, again, judgment aside, but I'm being
I
judgy.
just
Okay.
feel sad though.
I felt sad.
Yeah, yeah,
And I had my daughter was 9 months old, and I was doing this work while she was sleeping, but also I would meditate in the mornings and I would take her to yoga class with me, or I would do yoga. Like you can always make some time, especially if you're breathing or mindfulness or whatever. And so I think what I'm hearing from you is you embody mindfulness. So what you're hoping for others is how you carry yourself,
Right. Right.
right? And I think
Right.
that's really important that
Very.
we must make time for whatever it is that we are teaching.
Right. Right. I mean, the adage, you can't give what you don't have
Right.
in all things.
Yeah. Like you couldn't have been present with that mom and made a difference in that situation had you not been pulling in your mindfulness skills.
Right. And the permission to, there were a couple moments I remember thinking, oh, this is kind of crunchy, and it just didn't feel good, right? And so I just kind of just took those breaths and leaned into what's for the highest good here, right? How can I
Mm,
be of service?
yeah.
And then it all just tumbled in and was easy. But to, for people who are teaching to know that it doesn't matter how long you've been teaching, we never know it all, right? And
Of
we're always
course.
learning, and to give ourselves that grace.
Yeah.
Um, when we get to those sticky moments, it just makes it a little easier, I think.
Yeah. Oh, that's another thing someone said years ago. They say, "Oh, well, you're a yogi. You never would get mad, or I've never seen you cranky or
Yeah,
upset or sad." And I think, are you kidding? I
right,
feel all of that. And it's
right.
because of this practice that we have that we are able to embody it, to recognize it, to feel it, to move through it and release it in a more healthy way, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I love it. So you've spoken about, the students have talked to you about the, inhale and outhale and,
yeah,
calling it stillness instead of meditation. And those are kind of, I'm thinking these are ways that it's making it more natural and child accessible, So do you have any other examples of how you're able to speak to your students or the grown-ups in a way that makes mindfulness more natural? Because I still think there's, as you spoke about very clearly, there's still a bit like, what is this thing? And, am I being mindful now? Or, it's just bringing the intentionality. But how do you bring in more natural language?
well, one, I believe all children are geniuses. So
Mm.
I I think I don't change language for them. I meet them where they are. It's like, really, my 5-year-olds can talk about their amygdala and their prefrontal cortex, but we make it fun. What is this, my amygdala? I can't hear you, amygdala. And isn't this fun? And don't you feel like a scientist, right? Like, we just
Yeah.
bring in the play of it, and we bring in the permission, and we bring in real life shares, and we make room for the unexpected. And I want to share that. Um, I was in a second grade class, and no matter how long you teach, you learn to expect the unexpected and show up for what is, right? Um, But one of the practices I do with the kids, we call a happy memory mini movie. And we talk about the brain doesn't know the difference if something is a memory or really happening. And some people think it's a flaw of the brain, but we know it's really a gift, right? And so, when I give them the example, like, we have a lot of deer here. So the deer jumps out and it doesn't hit you, but you get all shaky inside. And, we talk about, so just bringing in stories that are applicable to kids, I'm talking with them, not to them, right?
Mhm.
So we were doing happy memory mini movie. I don't know what number it was, doesn't matter. And I just kind of guide them into their stillness, and then they bring up a memory, and I'm just like, notice, the colors, and notice, and I'm just gently prompting them through their happy memory mini movie of something that happened in their childhood. And I love this exercise with kids because it's like a sea of smiles. You see all these kids,
Mm.
their eyes are closed, they're all smiling. And I have always had fun with this one lesson. And then on this day, I didn't know of the 22 children in this class that, well, let me tell you what happened first. When we came out of it, I'm watching the sea of smiles, and I noticed two of them had tears, but were still smiling. And then I noticed a third one have tears, and he was still smiling. And I'm like, okay, they're reaching somewhere very precious.
Mm.
So when we opened our eyes and returned to our gathering, I asked if anybody wanted to share, and the little girl raised her hand, and she said, I could feel my mom's arms around me.
Mm.
And her mom had passed 6 months prior.
Mm.
And in this class of 22 children, 3 of them had lost a parent within that year. And 3 of them had tears and smiles. And I think it's so important that we normalize each now moment. And the teacher looks at me with these big eyes, and I just looked at this little girl and I said, "Isn't it nice to know that love lives forever?"
Mm.
You know, and we talked, and then the other kids did shares, and one of the 2 boys shared. But for her to be able to go back and feel her mama's presence and
Mm.
smile with a memory, and she shared it was a bike riding memory and what they were doing, and it was so precious. So is this grief or is this living fully? I don't know. I don't know that they're all that different. Um, but I'm just always, always in awe of the kids, always,
Mm.
and the
Mm.
ways they show up. You know, when we create that container for them that's safe and loving, the magic happens.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So, you've shared so much, Sally. You're just amazing. So, as a parting gift to everybody, sort of what's if someone were to start, what's the one practice that you is your favorite in your toolkit or that has something you always teach in your classes or that you speak to grown-ups? If teachers were to or parents, just one thing.
Oh, that's so hard. Okay, can I have two?
Okay.
I'll, I'll do the first one really quick because it's a review. Take 3, right? Take 3
Yes.
mindful breaths. That's that. It's your most portable practice, and practice it when you're not having stress so that when you have stress, it comes naturally, right? Um, but the other one, because I know that we have parents listening and I know that we have teachers listening, and I teach a lot about burnout and a lot about parental burnout. And so what I want to leave with is a tool um, that I call the exhale effect. And it really is the breathing practice where we breathe into the count of 3 and out to the count of 6. It doesn't matter if you breathe into 2 and out to 4 or into 4 and out to 8. You can't get it wrong. But the goal of this game is to breathe in twice as long as your exhale. And then when we understand the physiology of it, when we breathe in, it's neurologically tied, um, with our stress response. If somebody goes boo and you go, so we breathe in short, we breathe in. And when we breathe in, actually, just in general, that's when our heart rate goes up. And when we breathe out, it's like if somebody goes to give you a massage and you go, ah, or it's Friday and right? So when we make that extended exhale, which is neurologically tied to the relaxation response, also when we exhale, when we take that long breath out, it decreases our heart rate. And so when we make our inhale shorter than our exhale, if you can do that 5 times, you will reset your whole nervous system. If you can't sleep at night, you start doing that and do your counting because the mind can't really multitask. And then you'll wake up and it's morning, right? Or if you go to the
Mhm.
doctor's office and you have high blood pressure, you do that before it's your hack, right? If you're a child and you have a test or an exam or a sports thing, this is a power-packed breathing practice. So the simple is take 3. You can do it anywhere, anytime. And then the exhale effect is a little more intentional, but the benefits are profound. So thank you for letting me have 2, but I want to leave our listeners with
Yeah.
something that's going to be impactful for them.
Right, and to sort of bring it to real life, I
Yeah.
practice that, the extended exhale in the middle of the night because 'cause I've got really bad perimenopause symptoms right now, and I know I'm not alone with this, and I
No.
use that to get back to sleep. When I'm as a teacher substitute, I often will do that right before class comes in or before they come in after lunch. As a parent, I often will do that right before my daughter comes home if I know there's something been going on in school and I need to sort of prepare myself or I need to sort of transition from my work life to my home life. So
Yeah.
it's everywhere, right?
It
Or if you feel yourself in a car feeling frustrated or irritated by someone, do it there. Or if I'm waiting in, a pickup line or picking my daughter up from swim, I do it there. So it can be anywhere, right? This extended exhale is in your toolkit in all situations. I love it.
And acknowledging that, as a teacher and as a parent, we're a surrogate nervous system for our kids, right? They co-regulate
Yes.
it with us.
Right.
And so, you're identifying all those transition times, those choice points, that when you take this breath, that child, when it comes to you, it's going to receive you as your best self, as opposed to the tension that you're having. And then put those together. So it really is
Yes.
powerful and transformative, and it's simple. The hardest part is just
Mm.
remembering to do it. So
Yes,
yeah,
right.
yeah,
Yeah, Sharon Salzberg says that, right? That's the
right.
most yeah, hardest time to do it. So I love this so much. Where can people find you online or get your book or find out more about Mindful Compass?
Oh, I'm pretty easy. It's either mindfulcompass.com or email Sally at Mindful Compass. I do consulting and I do coaching and I work in classrooms. And, I'm so passionate that this is the work of my heart. And I'm so
Yeah.
privileged to do this work. So thank you so much for inviting me to spend this time with you.
Mhm.
I don't know why we
I
haven't met before.
I don't know
And to
either.
be with your precious community, the way they're showing up, and they're here today. And I'm honored to be here. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
thank you. Thank you. The light in me sees the light in you, Sally. I'm so glad we connected. And here's to many more
Right?
goodness together. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Sally.
Absolutely. Thank you.